Are you ready to dive into a topic that really doesn't get talked about enough? I mean, we're talking bacterial vaginosis, BV, and it's something that like almost a third of women experience at some point.
Yeah.
But nobody really seems to want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that people tend to keep quiet about.
For sure. And in this deep dive, we're going to like totally ditch the hushed tones and awkward coughs because knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's amazing how much misinformation is out there and how much shame is associated with something that's incredibly common.
Seriously. So let's just jump right into it with myth, #1BV equals bad hygiene. Like you get it because you're, well, not exactly the cleanest person in the world.
Okay, so that is a myth we can definitely debunk right away. BV has nothing to do with how often you shower or what kind of soap you use.
So if it's not about being squeaky clean, then what's the deal? It's about bacteria, right?
Yeah, you got it. Think of your vagina like a garden. Okay, a healthy garden needs a balance of different plants and stuff. But if you have too much of one kind, it can throw the whole ecosystem out of whack.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
Right. So BV happens when there's an imbalance of the bacteria that naturally live in the vagina. Certain bacteria that are normally there in smaller amounts start to like take over. And the good bacteria, the ones that are supposed to keep things in check, well, they kind of get overwhelmed.
Wow. I never thought about it that way. That's a really good analogy.
Right. And the important thing to remember is that even if you're the most hygienic person ever, you can still get BV. It's about the bacterial environment, not so much about personal cleanliness.
Which leads us right into myth, #2, the one that I'm sure has caused a lot of arguments.
Yeah.
BV is an STI, as in you can only get it from someone else.
And that's nope, BV is not an STI. It's easy to think that because we often associate vaginal health with sexual health. But remember, we're talking about bacteria that are already present in the vagina.
So it's more about something happening to disrupt the balance that's already there, rather than introducing something totally new.
Exactly. Now, having sex can sometimes be a factor.
Because it introduces new bacteria and kind of shakes things up a bit.
Exactly. But that's different from BV being a sexually transmitted infection in the same way that chlamydia or gonorrhea are.
Okay, so that is a really important distinction to make. And speaking of things that are often misunderstood, let's talk about symptoms. Because myth, #3, is that BV always has noticeable symptoms. Yeah. Like you'll always know if something is off down there.
And that is not always the case. The truth is many women with BV might not have any symptoms at all. We call this being asymptomatic.
Asymptomatic. So they could have this bacterial imbalance happening, but their body's not giving them any warning signs.
Precisely. And that is why regular checkups with your gynecologist are so important. It's always better to catch things early. Think of it like going to the dentist. You might not feel any pain, but they can spot a cavity before it turns into a major problem.
That makes a lot of sense, because if you don't know something's wrong, you're certainly not going to seek treatment for it.
Mm-hmm.
But what about if you do start to notice something's up? And this leads us to myth, #4, home remedies can cure BV.
Ah, yes, the allure of a quick fix. Who doesn't love a good home remedy?
Right. So are things like yogurt, garlic, tea tree oil, are they all just a bunch of nonsense?
Not necessarily. I mean, some of them might provide temporary relief. Yogurt, for example, has probiotics, which are those good bacteria we've been talking about. So it's possible that it could help to restore some balance in the short term, but it's not a long-term solution.
So it's not actually addressing the root cause of the problem.
Exactly. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. It might make you feel a little better for a minute, but it's not going to fix the underlying issue.
So what happens if you just ignore BV altogether? Is it really that big of a deal? And that brings us to 2. Myth #5, BV is no big deal. You can just ignore it and it'll go away on its own.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. While BV might not always cause noticeable symptoms, leaving it untreated, it can actually lead to some pretty serious health problems.
Okay, so like what kind of problems are we talking about here? Give me the scary truth.
Well, one thing is that having BV can actually increase your risk of getting other infections.
Really? Like what kind of infections?
We're talking about some sexually transmitted infections, like chlamydia and gonorrhea, actually.
Wow. Seriously? I never would have thought those things would be connected.
It might seem strange, but it actually makes sense when you think about it. Remember how we were talking about the balance of bacteria in the vagina?
Yeah.
Well, when that balance gets thrown off and the good bacteria are outnumbered, it can actually change the environment of the vagina. Normally, it's slightly acidic, which helps to protect against infection, but BV disrupts that natural defense mechanism.
So it's like it weakens your body's security system and makes it easier for other infections to take hold.
Exactly. And it's not just STIs either. Untreated BV also increases the risk of something called pelvic inflammatory disease, or PID for short.
Okay, so PID, that sounds a little more intense than just like a yeast infection or something. What exactly is that?
PID is definitely not something you want to mess around with. It's basically an infection that affects the upper reproductive organs, like the uterus, the fallopian tubes, and the ovaries. And if it's not treated properly, it can lead to some long-term complications.
Like what?
We're talking chronic pelvic pain, difficulty getting pregnant, even ectopic pregnancies in some cases.
Okay, yeah, that definitely bumps BV up a few notches on the seriousness scale.
Yeah,
Not something you want to just ignore.
absolutely. And there's one more group we need to talk about where BV can be a particularly big concern, pregnant women.
Oh, right, of course.
Mhm.
Because pregnancy already comes with its own set of risks and challenges.
Exactly. So it's really important for pregnant women to be aware of BV and to get treatment if they need it, because studies have shown that having DV during pregnancy can increase the risk of some complications.
Like what? What kind of complications?
Things like preterm labor, which means the baby is born too early, and low birth weight, which can lead to other health problems for the baby.
So bottom line, BV is not something to take lightly whether you're pregnant or not.
100%. If you notice anything unusual, like an unusual discharge or a fishy odor or any itching or burning, those are all signs that something could be off and you should talk to your doctor.
Even if you're not sure if it's BV, right? Better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly. And remember, even if you don't have any symptoms, regular gynecological checkups are still so important. It's always better to catch things early.
So basically, we all need to be proactive about our vaginal health.
Yeah, I feel like we've all learned so much today. It's amazing how many myths are out there about something that affects so many women.
It really is. And unfortunately, those myths can prevent people from getting the help they need. So I'm glad we could clear some of that up today, for sure. Okay, so to recap, we've busted some major myths about BV. It's not about poor hygiene. It's not an STI. And it can have serious consequences if left untreated. But what are the key takeaways here? What do we want our listeners to remember most?
I think the most important thing is that you don't have to suffer in silence. If you're experiencing any symptoms or if you just have questions or concerns, talk to your doctor or a healthcare provider.
Absolutely. They're there to help you, not to judge you.
Exactly. They've seen it all and they want to help you feel your best.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive on bacterial vaginosis, what's one thing you can do right now to take control of your vaginal health? Maybe it's making an appointment for a checkup or having an honest conversation with your partner. Whatever it is, remember, knowledge is power and your health is worth advocating for.